Let us start. It's already 5 minutes past 3 Almaty time. I'm welcoming everybody again. UNESCO Cluster Bureau is starting one of the consecutive series on the development of the museum working staff. It's already the 10th meeting that we are conducting, and I think that it's pretty symbolic that today it is the 17th of May, which is the International Museums Day. Therefore, I would like to congratulate all museum workers on their professional holiday. And I would like to remind you that if you missed the previous webinars in the framework of this cycle of lectures on our YouTube, there is a playlist, and you will see the link in the chat of Zoom. Information on the upcoming webinars will be published in all our social media and on our official website, so follow us. And now you will see the same link in the chat as well. The video recording of today's webinar will also be published on our YouTube channel, both in Russian and in English. Moreover, for our today's Museums Day, my colleagues have prepared several videos on the museums from the countries of Central Asia and Caucasus. The main purpose is to demonstrate the richness of our museum collections for different audiences, for the inhabitants of our countries, and for the guests. And you will see the link to these videos in our Zoom chat. Now, let's get down to our today's topic of discussion. And I would like to remind you that today we are starting a series of webinars, which is organized jointly with the Secretariat of the International Museums Council, ICOM, and ICOM have kindly found for us, recommended to us several specialists who have absolutely unique experience of work and extraordinary professional competences. And before I will introduce our speaker, I would like, first of all, to turn the floor to my colleague from ICOM Secretariat, Carlos Eduardo Serrano, who is the coordinator on the capacity building programs, who will make a very short presentation on the activities of ICOM. Please, the floor is yours, Carlos.
Hello, everybody. Well, thank you very much. I need to first to thank UNESCO office in Almaty for inviting us to be part of this program. And I also want to thank ICOM CC. It's our international committee for conservation that helped us to find these unique experts that will be part of today's seminar and to the following seminar organized by UNESCO Almaty. I will briefly talk about the ICOM, the International Council of Museums, because sometimes in some areas it is not very well known. So me as ICOM Capacity Building Coordinator will tell you a little bit about it. Well, ICOM in principle is a network of experts. We have about 49,000 museum professionals being part of ICOM, and it's an international forum where it's a network where you can get the right contacts for advice to develop projects or to develop your career or your academic projects. You can, being part of ICOM is also an opportunity to discuss with the specialists in various fields. I will tell you a little bit more in a few seconds. But we also organize a series of conferences, seminars, and events and of course, our triennial general conference where you can meet museum professionals from all over the world. Talking about the international, the specialized professionals, when you join ICOM, you also join an international committee. Our international committees are specialized committees in the different fields of the museum profession. I'm highlighting some of them here. So we have ICOM-CC, the International Committee for Conservation. We have NPR, that is the International Committee for Marketing and Public Relations. We have ICME, well, that's for the Museum of Ethnography, or NATHIS for the Museums and Collections of Natural History. So these international committees, they also develop their own activities, conferences, seminars, and their own publications. I just want to say that there are many benefits of being part of ICOM. As I will give this presentation in the different seminars organized together with UNESCO Almaty, so I don't want to repeat myself. So today I will just talk about one important one benefit of being part of ICOM, besides the card that let you enter to many museums for free. And one important one is that being part of ICOM, it's also a tool to stay informed. We have many publications, but we also have other communication platforms like ICOM Voices, where you can publish your articles about your own work. So making your work visible. We have our academic index journal, that is the Museum International, that we developed together with Routledge. And of course, we have the series of newsletters where you can receive all updated information about ICOM activities. And also, being part of ICOM, when you are part of ICOM, you have free access to many publications in our members area. So you have access to journals like the Journal of Heritage Tourism, Heritage and Society, Museum History Journal, the Museum Management and Curatorship, and the Museum and Social Issues Journal, and many other publications that are for free for our members. And you can also get 20% discount for all publications, like in paper, published by Routledge. In the other webinars, I will tell you other benefits of being part of ICOM, like how to make your work visible, how to access to training and capacity building activities. We have grants and scholarships for our members, and also how ICOM support projects and the participation of our members in different activities. If you are not part of ICOM, you can request your membership through your national committees. Here I'm giving you the contact details of our 4 committees in the region: ICOM Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Kyrgyzstan. But if there is no national committee in your country, you can also request your membership directly to the Secretariat. You can write to membership department in the email that is on the bottom. That's all I want to say for today. I will talk about other benefits in our next webinar. So I let Mario and Frances to continue. And thank you again. Thank you very much for inviting us to be part of this program.
Карлос, большое спасибо. Тебя могу только добавить.
Thank you very much, Carlos. I would like to add only on my side that in the course of our previous webinars, we have already had the representatives of ICOM Russia, ICOM Azerbaijan, and they were demonstrating the role of ICOM on the collection of information and the spread of the professional skills that are actually supported by ICOM. So thank you very much, not only to the Secretariat of ICOM, but also to national ICOM committees for collecting the specialized knowledge and for sharing their experience, not only with the specialists in their own countries, but also on the regional level. And here I would like now to turn the floor to our speaker, Frances Lennard, who is the honorary professor and the associated scientific professor of Glasgow University, and she is specialized on conservation of textile. And today she will be talking about the practices of textile conservation under the conditions of museums. And I would like to remind all our participants that if you have any questions or comments on the presentation of Ms. Lennard or on this short introduction of ICOM activities made by Carlos, please put down your questions in the chat and we will be able to discuss the questions after Ms. Lennard will complete her presentation. Please, the floor is yours, Frances.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you to UNESCO in Almaty and to ICOM for inviting me to speak today. I'm very happy to be speaking to you this afternoon about textile conservation. So I'm going to share my screen. Excellent. So my name is Frances Lennard and I have just retired from the University of Glasgow in the UK, where I was Professor of Textile Conservation. And the University of Glasgow runs a textile conservation programme, a professional training for people who want to work in museums and look after textiles. That's a 2-year programme. And I have taught on that programme, and I was leader of the programme for many years. So I hope today to just give you a very brief introduction to the whole topic of textile conservation, which is a very large subject, but I also intend to give you some resources that you can follow up things that I'm speaking about. So, textile conservation, what we are looking at here really is the preservation of textiles which are deemed to be culturally significant. That might be because of their age, their significance, their importance. Textiles can be important for many different reasons. And I've put a selection of different images on the screen here just to show you how broad a topic textiles are. Textiles encompasses a whole range of different things, from the clothes that we wear to embroideries, woven tapestries that you can see here, furnishings, it might be upholstered furniture. A whole range of different things come under the heading of textiles. I always say to our students that textiles, I think, covers a broader range than almost any other material that you might find in a museum. You might find yourself responsible for ancient Egyptian linen fabrics which were woven millennia ago. And you might also find yourself responsible for something that was created last year and encompasses all sorts of contemporary developments like optical fibers or smart textiles. And in between, there's a whole range of different textile techniques, from weaving, all the non-woven techniques like netting or knitting, lace making. And we also find a huge range of different materials added to our textiles, from metal threads to plastic buttons to paint, paper, all sorts of different things that we find used as embellishments. So I think textiles are a fairly complex field for the textile conservator. And today, our contemporary collections, which are now entering museums, make the task even more complex. We have a lot of modern materials, plastic objects. And while the hair comb on the left, which is made out of plastic, an early plastic, while we might think that that's not a textile, very often objects like this become the responsibility of the textile conservator because they are included with textile collections. Dolls, of course, may contain a whole range of different historic and modern materials. And today we also, as textile conservators, are often responsible for contemporary artworks. I've just put an example on the right here. And that also adds to the complexity of our role. We have to think there very much about what it is the artist is trying to say with their artwork. So, being a textile conservator is not straightforward. There is a lot of complexity. But we have a lot of protocols which will help us to find our way through the complexity. And today I wanted to talk to you about two key aspects of textile conservation practice. So starting with preventive conservation and then moving to look a little bit at interventive conservation. And as I mentioned, I mean, this is a huge topic really to talk about in an hour. So I'm only going to cover the very basics of these topics. But at the end of the presentation, I'm going to put a list of all sorts of different useful resources which you can go to and find out a lot more information if there are any particular aspects that interest you. And I've tried to put information on the slides, and as has already been said, you'll be able to go to YouTube and look at the PowerPoint afterwards and look again at the information. So you don't have to worry too much today about taking in every detail. So I want to start by looking at preventive conservation, and preventive conservation is really important for museum collections in historic houses and other institutions. And really within preventive conservation, the focus is on the whole collection. We're looking at whole collections rather than individual objects here. And what we're trying to do is to prevent damage, to make sure that textiles are in a good situation so that they're not damaged while they're in store, so that they continue to be used and so that they are preserved for the future. And of course, conservation is always a balance between use now and preservation for tomorrow. And I think that the textile conservator's role is very much about balancing those two needs. So in English, we have a saying that prevention is better than cure. I'm sure that there is something similar in Russian, and that's very much what we're trying to achieve with preventive conservation. So as the earlier slide showed, in preventive conservation, I want to talk a little bit about packing and handling. That is, good handling can avoid physical damage, which can easily happen to fragile textiles. I want to talk a bit about environment, and then I want to talk a little bit about pest control. So to start with handling, as I say, this can really be vital to avoid physical damage. Our textiles can be very weak, very fragile. They can also be very large. So handling is a really important aspect of preventive conservation. And a lot of the slides that I'm showing you here show our students. And these are some of our students from a recent. Here it's taking, and it's really important that we think carefully about how to do this, that we plan what we're doing, we make sure that there's a space to move the textile to, we make sure it's clean, we make sure that we've got the right equipment to do the job. So planning is the key vital aspect here. And the way that we store our textiles can be really, really important. We've all seen examples of textiles that have been damaged simply by being stored in a poor environment because they've been folded, perhaps they've been squashed into boxes. They haven't been kept in the ideal environment. And there's a huge amount that we can do just by improving the environment within which textiles are stored. And by that, I don't just mean the temperature and the humidity, I mean the state within which we keep them. So again, we need to think carefully about what we're doing. There are a lot of tips, again, in resources at the end on the best way to store textiles. But the really important things are to make sure that we use safe materials, so acid-free or inert materials in conjunction with our textiles, next to our textiles, and that we make sure that our textiles have space and that they are each looked at individually. I've got an example here of excellent storage at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. This is the Cloth Workers Centre, where a large proportion of the textile collection for the museum is stored. And I think you get a glimpse here of the sort of ordered nature of the collection. And of course, the environmental conditions are very well controlled in this space. But firstly, here, I just wanted to show you a few of the ways in which the physical storage can aid preventive conservation. So, for example, storing costumes on padded hangers is a very good way to provide support, unless we have very heavy costumes or particularly fragile costumes, in which case they are better stored in boxes. Here you see labels on the objects. Here the objects have dust covers, which prevents damage from acidic dust. But putting a label and a photograph or a diagram on the outside is a really good way of avoiding unpacking objects unnecessarily. We don't have to go through a whole box to see what's in it. We can see clearly on the outside what it contains. And here also you can see internal padding in objects like shoes, which prevents damage caused by them collapsing on themselves with time. We also need to think about the physical impact of display on our textiles. So, for example, this textile here has been damaged with nail holes. You can see has made physical holes, and the iron staining has caused rust. And we've also seen some distortion caused by this method of display. So again, there are a lot of tips and different techniques that we recommend to display textiles, using Velcro, for example, or stitching textiles onto fabric-covered acid-free boards. And again, one of the really important aspects is to use safe and inert acid-free materials. It's also important to avoid chemical damage to objects that are on display, and this of course applies to all types of materials, not just textiles. It's important to think about the materials that we introduce ourselves into display cases. So things like wood, things like wood, cardboard, even things like paints and adhesives can, within the enclosed environment of a display case, can lead to damage through the off-gassing of gases like acetic acid, for example, which can cause problems. Here you can see that acid caused by a wooden backboard has caused this sort of rust staining and spotting onto a fabric behind a textile. So just to reiterate the message that it's really important to think about the materials that we use in combination with our historic objects. So moving from handling to think about controlling the environment, and there are a lot of different aspects of the environment that we need to think about, but light is particularly important. Light is probably the most damaging environmental factor for textiles. And particularly textiles like silk are really badly affected by light. It can cause a lot of damage. And here I've just put up this diagram to show the light spectrum. And these are the bits that concern us, the bits in the center of the spectrum: visible light, and at a lower wavelength, ultraviolet radiation, and here at a higher wavelength, infrared radiation. And essentially, the further down this scale you move, the lower the wavelength of the light, then the more damaging it is. So we are particularly concerned about ultraviolet radiation, and we can actually exclude that altogether from our museum displays because we don't need it to see textiles, and it is extremely damaging. We also, of course, need to protect our objects from visible light as much as we can. But of course, we need some light to see the objects. This is just to show you that the damage that light can cause to our textiles. On the left here, we have a silk textile, and as well as fading, which you can see really clearly on the velvet wall covering here. This has had this is a wall covering which has had a picture attached to it. So the red velvet has been completely protected underneath the picture and has been faded and weakened by light where it hasn't been protected. And here again, you can see the physical damage that light has caused to this silk towel. So again, there are a lot of different ways that we can protect textiles from light. We can try to reduce light levels as much as possible. We should also think about reducing the time of exposure, because with light, it is both the amount of light and the length of exposure which causes damage. So we can use both of those factors to tailor light in different situations. But in this room in a historic house, you can see that light is being excluded through the curtains and blinds on the windows. And in a setting like this, the lights would be turned off completely whenever, and the windows would be covered completely whenever the house is closed and there are no visitors. So again, resources at the end of the PowerPoint will point you to more information on this. Humidity is also something that we need to be careful of with textiles. And we want to avoid extremes of humidity. If we have high relative humidity, that can lead to very obvious problems like mold. And it can cause metal corrosion, it can cause dye bleeding, as you see here. And also pests tend to thrive more in high humidity. Very low humidity can also be damaging because it can make textiles more brittle and make them more prone to cracking. One of the things that's particularly damaging for textiles is fluctuating humidity. And that's particularly important if your textile is constrained. You know, here, for example, this is a silk embroidery, which was attached around the edges to a wooden frame. And that causes a lot of problems if a textile is in an uncontrolled environment. If the humidity is fluctuating between drier and less dry, then the textile will expand and contract with changes in humidity. And that puts a lot of strain on the textile, a lot of stress. And eventually we find that this type of textile cracks. And there are cracks here, and you can see that the crack here, you can see the distortion that this causes. But a very characteristic type of damage caused by fluctuations in humidity. So it's really important for us when we are displaying and storing our textiles to be aware of the climatic conditions. And for that end, it's important that we monitor our conditions. So we should monitor both temperature, humidity, and light. Temperature itself doesn't play such a big role in damaging textiles, but it's very important because it has a direct effect on the humidity. So to that degree, temperature and humidity are linked. So it's important that we monitor them, But it's equally important that having monitored them, that we then act on what the monitoring is telling us. So it's important to keep records, to understand what our climatic conditions are, and then to use that information to do the best that we can in monitoring in controlling our conditions. And that doesn't always mean that we need to have fantastic air conditioning or expensive ways of controlling our textiles. We can do a lot to help textiles. Just for example, in storage, if we put a textile into an acid-free box, we pack it with acid-free tissue paper, we're doing a lot to buffer it from changing relative humidity. So there is a lot that we can do using fairly simple and straightforward means. Pests are an important aspect of looking after textiles. In the UK, our main enemies are moths, clothes moths, and carpet beetles. I don't know if that is the case also where you are, but you will know what your most damaging insects locally are. But we can see really serious impact from insect pests on textiles which contain proteins. And it's the textiles that contain keratin protein in particular. And that can include wool. It can also include materials like fur and feathers. So we have to be very careful with a lot of our costumes and other textiles. And pests thrive particularly where they are undisturbed. So in a dark cupboard out of the way where nobody ever goes, that's the ideal breeding ground for insect pests. I think this is an interesting slide. It shows here that the carpet, the wool carpet, has been eaten by pests underneath where the table leg was. So just that little protected area has been enough to give shelter to insects. So again, we need to both monitor our pests just to see what if there is a risk to our collections, and we use a lot of these traps. We put those around our storerooms and our display spaces, and as you can see here, if you suddenly catch a lot of insects in your trap, it's a sign that you have got a problem and you need to do something about it. So monitoring is really important. If you discover a pest outbreak, then it's important to isolate it, to quarantine the affected textiles, and then to treat affected textiles. We tend not to use pesticides where we can avoid it today, because they can be dangerous for humans as well as for the insects. And in the UK, our most common methods of treating insect infestations are deep freezing and anoxia, excluding oxygen from the textile. Again, there's a lot of information that you can read about this. Oh, sorry. And I go back to the top of this list. One really, really important way of avoiding insect pests is good housekeeping, keeping our collections clean, keeping storerooms clean, cleaning under display cases, making sure that there is no space for pests. And what they particularly like is a sort of dusty space under a display case where they're undisturbed, where there's a good food source in the dust, which often contains a lot of textile fibre. So 3 key things there really: good housekeeping, monitoring, and treatment if necessary. It's also important to protect our textiles from dust and from pollution in the air. Dust can be extremely damaging. It can be very acidic. It can work its way into textiles and become very, very difficult to remove. And this is a very extreme example on the slide here. This is a metal thread embroidery, which is so thickly encrusted in dust that you could barely see it. And you can see that it's been here half cleaned. So the half on the right has been surface cleaned and the dust has been removed, and you can see what a huge difference that makes. Hopefully we should never see textiles in this condition, but I think this textile doesn't appear to have been too badly damaged by it, but it is always a risk. So keeping objects in boxes in store or in display cases, if they're on display, can protect them from both dust and also from gases like sulfur dioxide or nitrogen dioxide on display. And that can also help to protect our textiles from damage. Another aspect of preventive conservation is emergency planning. It's astonishing really how often disasters can hit collections in museums. Our textile conservation students do a work placement in a museum or in a historic house every year for a few weeks, and I'm always struck by how often there can be, not a major problem, but a small problem, a flood in the storeroom, for example. So it is certainly something that we should be alert to, and it's important that museums have emergency plans in place so that they have a procedure. They know what they would do in the case of any of the problems listed here. And this is actually a picture of the Textile Conservation Centre in Winchester when our centre was in its former home. And you can see just how close floodwater came to our building when there was a flood during the winter. We were also involved fairly recently with the fire at the Glasgow School of Art, which was well, in fact, there have been two fires within the art school, but a hugely important building, a building by the renowned architect Rennie Mackintosh in the centre of Glasgow. And we were called in as textile conservators to help with the aftermath of the fire. The school has a big reference collection of textiles which the students use as artistic inspiration. So they have a very big collection. Fortunately, their collection wasn't burnt, but it became wet because of the firemen pouring water into the building. So we helped out with drying the contents of the collection. And you can see here some of the ways in which that was done. Okay, so I've been talking about preventive conservation, about how we can look after our textile collections as a way of avoiding damage, making sure that textiles are kept as safely as possible, avoiding both physical damage and chemical damage. And now I want to turn to interventive conservation, and here the focus is very much on individual textiles. So we're talking about treating textiles, and I want to divide that into three different groups. So cleaning, supporting damaged textiles, and mounting textiles. And all three are very important to achieve our goal of stabilizing the textile's condition. And that's very much what we're aiming to do. Often textiles are treated so that they can be displayed, and of course, improving their appearance is an important aspect of treatment. But the important goal really is to make sure that they are stable for the long term, so that they can be safely displayed today, but also preserved for the future. And I think this is almost the most important slide in my whole lecture. So when we are treating textiles, we are, although of course it's a principle of conservation that it should be reversible, that our methods should be able to be reversed. Generally, when we're really looking at what we're doing, a lot of treatments aren't reversible. Cleaning isn't reversible. And so we are making quite an intervention into the structure of the textile. And it's really important that we think about what we're doing and why we're doing it. So I always think that, you know, this is what we're teaching our students in Glasgow. It's not, of course, they're learning the different skills of conservation, but even more importantly, they're learning about why do we do it and in what cases do we use which treatments. So we need to think about, why are we carrying out this treatment? Is it for display? Is it going to be on an object in a study collection? Is it going to be handled? Is it going into a private home where people, you know, want to continue not exactly using, not wearing it in the sense that, you know, not using it in the sense that they would want to wear a textile, but, you know, it's still part of their property and they want to enjoy it. If it's going to go into a fine arts museum, perhaps it will be treated differently from if it's going on display in a social history museum. You know, different aspects of the object will become important. So we need to think very much about what it is that we're conserving. Are we conserving that physical structure so that we can put it on display? Is it the image that's important? You know, in the case of an embroidery, for example, or a tapestry, is it really important that we try to make the image readable to the audience? Or are we more interested in the information that's contained within the textile? You know, perhaps we have an archaeological textile, and if we clean it routinely, then we might lose a lot of information about the soil, perhaps, that the textile came from. Or perhaps we might lose information about the way that textile was used. You know, we could very easily lose creases, for example, which might actually have told us something about the way that textile was worn or the way that it was placed within its burial context. So it's really important that we think about what we want to achieve when we're conserving our textiles. So interventive conservation often begins with cleaning. And I think cleaning is something that used to be done really routinely. When I started my training back in the 1980s, it was fairly routine. We just used to clean textiles because we could, and they were improved. Nowadays, I think we're a lot more cautious about cleaning. We do think very carefully about not just whether it's going to cause damage, which it easily could, but also, as I say, about whether we might be removing something that we want to keep. And any textile, it might contain really important information about how it was used, how it was worn. And there might be all sorts of, you know, symbolic attributes. You know, there might be blood stains, which are important, for example, important evidence of it might be the whole reason why the textile is being preserved. And so we do need to think carefully, do we want to clean this textile? And if we decide that we do, then there are a lot of techniques that we can use. And they nearly always begin with mechanical cleaning, so very gentle vacuum cleaning or brushing, as we see here on the left, or maybe using mechanical methods like a sponge, a chemical sponge, which you can very gently use on the surface of some textiles to lift off dirt, as you see on the right here. Vacuum cleaning is probably our most basic treatment, which we tend to use often. And you will see we use a range of different vacuum cleaners here. If you have a big textile, then you can't just use very tiny vacuum cleaners. But textiles can be very easily damaged if they are fragile, if they have damaged areas by vacuuming. So we need to be careful. And one way of doing that is by protecting the textile with a screen, as you can see on the right-hand side here. Wet cleaning is something that we carry out from time to time, not routinely, I would say, but from time to time it is a very useful technique. And on the left here, you can see a sampler, an embroidered sampler before treatment, and on the right, you see it after treatment. And it looks a slightly different color. That's partly because it is cleaner after treatment. This is often a very effective way of removing soiling from this type of embroidery. But it also has a support fabric in the right-hand image. You can just see here, there is a dyed support fabric, which has been placed behind the whole sampler. And as the sampler itself is fairly sort of semi-transparent, it picks up the color of the fabric that you put underneath it. But here the textile is being wet cleaned in a little bath. You can see dirt is coming out in the water. Here it's being pinned to dry. And this type of treatment both removes soiling, water-soluble soiling, but it also has an important aspect of humidification. It helps you to reshape the textile because it can help you to remove distortion that has set in over time as the water enters the fibers and plasticizes them. So wet cleaning is an important aspect often of treatment. But you do have to be really careful of this type of treatment because it's very, very easy to cause damage. I showed you a picture earlier of another sampler which had blue staining where the dye had run, and that can happen really easily with this type of object. So we never, for example, recommend that people wet clean their own samplers just because the risk of damage is too great. And we would always take a tiny sample from the back of each different color yarn if we can, and test it in solutions, detergent solution and different pH solutions, so that we can be fully in control of the wet cleaning process, and so that we know how to avoid any potential dye bleeding that might happen. Sometimes we use solvents on textiles, and that can be if a textile needs cleaning but can't be washed, as here. This is a very complex costume with a lot of layers. It has metal threads, it has, there are a lot of different aspects which mean that we wouldn't want to put water on this object, but it still needed to be cleaned. And in this case, solvent cleaning was appropriate. It was both safe, and we tested again everything. And we knew that the type of soiling would respond well to solvents. We don't have facilities, hardly any large museum here has facilities for large-scale solvent cleaning, so it's usually a case of having to work in partnership with a commercial dry cleaner and working with them to clean things very safely. And again, that means testing, but it also means preparation. And here you can see stages in the preparation where the object has to be very carefully secured so that when it goes into a dry cleaning machine, it's not going to be damaged. So this is a very extreme method of cleaning, and we would always do it rarely, very cautiously, and only after a lot of testing, a lot of preparation, and being very secure in your partnership with the dry cleaning firm that you work with. So cleaning is a really important in terms of stabilizing textiles. And in that case, we're talking really about chemical stabilization. Dirt can be damaging, and dirt is generally acidic. And if a textile is left in a very soiled, dirty condition, then that can cause damage over the long term. So cleaning can be very effective, both in making a textile look better, it improves the appearance, but more importantly, it's making it more chemically stable for the future. The second aspect of interventive treatment I wanted to talk about is support. And this is something that we often need to do with our textiles. And this is providing physical stabilization. So essentially what we often do is put a new textile behind a weak area of our historic textile. And here you can see one of our students working with, here, this is a fire screen, an embroidered fire screen. It's being supported onto a new fabric, which is chosen because it's appropriate weight, it's been dyed an appropriate color, it's an appropriate weave to fill in visually the missing areas of the original textile, but also to provide really good support. And we have to stitch the textile very carefully. It's very easy to stitch a textile onto a support and for the support to be too tight. We often find this if textiles have been patched badly in the past. The new fabric is often too tight and causes more damage. So we have to plan our stitching very carefully to make sure that the weight of the textile is distributed. We're working from weak areas into strong areas. We're making sure that the textile is supported overall. But this is a core treatment really often carried out with historic textiles. I mentioned previously that we need to think about what it is that we're conserving. And in the case of tapestry conservation, there is a whole range of different techniques that have been used in the past, very much designed to redefine the image of the tapestry, because the woven structure of the tapestry means that any loss affects both the image and the structure. They are one and the same. And so damage to the structure means damage to the image. And so there are a lot of tapestry conservation techniques which aim to bring back the image as well as to support the structure. And I've been very interested in doing some work on looking at the different techniques that we use to support tapestries. And we have some recent publications which you can find on through the University of Glasgow website. But I just add this slide really just to show, again, we need to think carefully about what we're doing, how we carry out our treatments, and what type of stitch we use here in order to achieve both redefinition of the image and stabilization of the structure, but without, I think there's a danger of completely remaking a tapestry if we end up doing too much stitching. I've just put in this slide to emphasize the point that, again, we need to think carefully about what it is that we're conserving. And this was a really interesting object treated by one of our students fairly recently. And this is a military jacket that had a very interesting history. It was worn in India in the 19th century, and the person who was wearing this was the subject of an attack. And so you can see he was badly damaged. He was badly injured. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know why this keeps happening. He was injured and the coat was damaged with sword slashes. So all of this damage has been done by a sword, and you can see that there are blood stains on the coat. So again, here, sword cuts. And in order to make this coat safe to be able to display it on a mannequin, as you see it here on the mannequin, it had to be supported. It had to have some stitching onto a new fabric to prevent those cuts opening up and causing further damage. But here, and you can see that clearly in the detail here, it was decided that the support stitching would be made using a net fabric, a semi-transparent fabric. And so the weak areas of the coat have actually been sandwiched between two layers of this dyed red net. And this was done so that the sword cuts weren't disguised in any way. If they had been stitched onto a dyed red wool fabric, they would have been much less visible on display. And it was felt that the really important thing about this coat is its history, its very dramatic history. And the museum wanted museum visitors to be able to see this. So here the support has been chosen very carefully to help to make the coat safe for display on a mannequin, but to draw out its very interesting history and to make that visible. The third aspect of interventive treatment that I wanted to underline is mounting, and providing a good mount for a textile can be just as important as supporting it, treating it with an actual physical support. So mounts for both storage and display are really important. It's important that they give a good support to the textile. Again, that they provide physical support, and also that they don't cause any chemical damage. So again, using acid-free and inert materials is really important. And this is important for all types of objects, but particularly, of course, for costume. And here, some of our former students practicing costume mounting. And when you're mounting historic costume, it's really important, of course, that you get the correct silhouette so that the dress or the garment makes sense when it's on display, so that the museum visitor can see what shape it should have been. But it's also really important to provide that physical stability. And this is done by making sure that the mannequin is padded and is shaped in exactly the right way to provide good support. And that can sometimes mean creating something like replica undergarments, but sometimes it's done in, not by creating a replica, but by just adding something that gives the desired shape. So costume mounting is really important. And not just for, for historic costume, things that are much more recent also benefit very much from a mount which both provides support and creates an appropriate shape. And you can see that here from a 1960s coat, which was put on display. And on the left, you can see it just hanging on a mannequin that wasn't the right shape. You can see the display mount in the center, and you can see the coat mounted on that display mount on the right. So just before I end, I just wanted to expand a little bit to talk a bit more about different ways of interpreting our textiles on display. And I've got two examples here. It's not always essential that we carry out a full interventive treatment of our textiles. This is a very interesting garment. It was found, this is the original garment. It's a 17th century linen doublet. It was found hidden in a building, and that's believed to be an ancient practice of providing protection to buildings. And it was uncovered during building treatment. And it was going to go to a museum to be displayed. But it was felt that in this case, it probably wasn't the best thing to treat the object itself. It was felt to be really more important as an example of this practice of deliberately hiding garments and other objects in buildings. And so it wasn't treated, it was given this very nice mount, which could be used for storage and for display. And instead, a pattern was taken from the object and a replica was made, and this is the replica. And that can be displayed alongside the garment itself. And without intervening with the object at all and preserving any information that it contains, you have also nonetheless managed to show a museum visitor what the garment would have looked like originally. And this is another example which shows the power of our modern technology and how that can be used to enhance display in museums. This is a regimental flag on the left. Here it's been conserved. It was a flag from the Essex Regiment, which was flown in Korea in the 1950s. And when it came for conservation, you could just see that there was very, very faint chalk writing, just the remains of very faint chalk on the wool fabric background. And of course, it wasn't possible to do anything to enhance that on the textile itself. The cleaning was very, very careful to make sure that the surviving chalk wasn't removed. But by using a transmitted light to look at the textile more closely, it was possible to see, to make out better the chalk writing. And this here is just a digital image of the flag and with the chalk writing enhanced. And so you can now see exactly what it says. And it actually says Blighty bound, which Blighty is a sort of slang term for England. So this just refers to the fact that the soldiers in the regiment had heard that they were going back to the UK. And so they wrote Blighty bound on their flag and carried it. Apparently it flew from their vehicle. And so by presenting this digital image alongside the original flag, it's really enhanced the storytelling aspect of this object. It's made it a much more interesting object to go on display. And that's without intervening in the object at all, really. It's also noteworthy that when this digital image was created, you can see that the color, the background color, is slightly different from the original flag. And this has been enhanced, both the embroidery and the background wool, to be more like the original color of the flag. So again, that helps to give the visiting audience a better sense of what the flag looked like originally. So I think my last pictures are I just wanted to put this in just to show that in the UK, certainly, interventive conservation has been used a great deal recently in public. There have been exhibitions about conservation in the UK, but also there have been various trials of carrying out conservation in public within the museum. So this is an exhibition at the British Museum where the conservators were working in front of the public. And you can see on the left here how interested people were. In historic houses like those owned by the National Trust, conservation is often now carried out in front of the public. And I think it's really recognised that the public are very interested in conservation. It's one of those behind the scenes aspects of museum work that in the past nobody ever got to see. And so it really enhances the interest of a museum visit. It makes a museum visit much more interesting for the public. And I think it's also good for us as conservators, as it raises our profile, both within the museum and to museum visitors. And so on the right, I've just put a picture of our students, and our students go out and give talks on textile conservation to schools and to community groups in Glasgow. And that's really one way of preparing them for a future in which it's very likely that they will be talking about their work to members of the public. So I think my overall conclusions here, both preventive and interventive conservation are important. They work together, and it's important that we use both techniques, really aiming at stabilizing the condition of our textiles, avoiding further damage, helping to make them readable by museum visitors, helping museum visitors to draw out the information that's within them, the stories that they carry. So as textile conservators, we can do a huge amount to actively treat textiles, to preserve them for the future, but also to make them available to visitors today. I mentioned that reversibility used to be an important guiding principle of conservation. Of course, we do still want to make our treatments as reversible as possible. But I think today our overriding principle is probably minimum intervention. You know, we should do as little as we can to stabilize our textiles rather than do as much as we can, because that way we're allowing different interpretations of them in the future, and we're minimizing any possible loss of information. So I always say to our students and others that, you know, as a textile conservator, it's important that you learn all those skills of how to clean objects, how to carry out support stitching, how to use all the range of preventive conservation techniques. But what's really important is that we understand our textiles. We know how it's made, what it's made of, how it has come to be in the condition that it's now in, how we can stop that damage continuing in the future. And then we need to know, you know, who does the textile belong to, what's going to happen to it in the future, how is it going to be displayed, what's important about it. And we can pull all of that together with our knowledge of techniques, and that will allow us to carry out the very best treatment for that particular textile in that particular collection, and hopefully help to ensure its preservation for as long a term as possible. So that is all that I want to say, but on the slide, which you'll be able to come back to if you look at the PowerPoint later, I've put a lot of different resources. So these very helpful guides to looking after costume and textiles specifically. I recommend you to the resources on the Canadian Conservation Institute website. There is a huge range of resources there which cover all sorts of different aspects of conservation and museum work. Very, very useful. So a few different things here. There's a website specifically dedicated to museum pests. The Collections Trust in the UK publishes its standards for looking after costume and textiles. The National Trust Manual of Housekeeping isn't available online, sadly, but is available as a book, and is a really thick book with huge amounts of information about looking after all sorts of collections. I've put up this paper by Diana Eastop about museum ethics. This is also available. This book is available as an ebook, so you can access it online, hopefully. But this is very much talking about looking at different ways of conserving objects depending on their location, you know, who they belong to. And I've also put the details for ICROM here, the International Centre in Rome. I think that's it. Oh, I've just put details of our University of Glasgow programme, if anybody's interested in that. So I think that's all that I wanted to say. So thank you very much indeed. It's been a long lecture. I hope everybody's managed to survive through through an hour of information about textiles. Thank you.
Большое спасибо. Я думаю, что...
Thank you very much. I guess all of our audience have thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. And in the course of your presentation, we already got some questions addressed to you. So let me try to ask these questions. Frances, the other members of the audience, if you'd like to ask more questions, please use our chat facility, or you can use the Q&A, raise your hand. Question number one. This is from Dana Danchenko. She, in fact, asked several questions. Are there particular borders or limits or thresholds for the temperature and humidity regime for storing textiles? Any specific range of humidity temperature within which you should keep these textiles?
Yes, that is a good question. Like, generally, we would recommend keeping textiles at a humidity of between about 45 and 60% RH. But it is quite a broad band, and because textiles are often part of mixed collections, then we can potentially expand that band a little. But as I mentioned, it's important both to avoid the extremes of humidity, but avoiding fluctuations is also important. So keeping somewhere within that band is probably the best for our textiles. I think we often find in the UK, textiles are kept in historic houses, for example, where there is not very much climate control. And it seems that our textiles sort of acclimatize themselves in a way, perhaps to higher humidity. But what is important there is that there isn't a sudden change. The humidity, temperature and humidity change gradually over time. So I hope that answers that question.
Спасибо.
Yes, you did. Thank you very much. Now, the second question, this is from the same listener, Dana Danchenko. What kind of cleaning materials could you use to use ethnic archaeological textiles that you find? What kind of cleaning agents can you use to restore or get these textiles which you come identify through archaeological digs to a better condition?
I think we're rather reluctant to use cleaning agents on archaeological textiles now in the UK. I think that we wouldn't normally use anything. We would try to minimize cleaning and limit it to surface cleaning. Perhaps some humidification to allow us to open out textiles which have been folded. But I think if cleaning is desired, then we would just keep it to, we would perhaps just use water if we could. We would keep it to the minimum, I think. So yeah, I think the main aim would be to do as little as possible with archaeological textiles, probably. Of course, it's difficult to generalize, but that's what I would say.
Спасибо.
Thank you. Thank you, Francis. The next question, maybe use some alkali-based solutions or chemicals, and if yes, what is the percentage of the alkali content in these solutions that you use for treating these textiles? Well, sorry, and right away, in addition to this, to complement the previous question, well, just a clarification, what do you actually use to be able to unfold the textiles unless you use cleaning agents? What else can you use in order to be able to unfold those textiles?
Yes. I think I would be very, very cautious about using alcohols on archaeological textiles just because they can dry your textile. They can make it too brittle. But we often achieve a lot just by using humidification in combination with surface cleaning to remove surface dust and dirt and soil. And so you can do that very gently by putting the textile into a chamber and increasing humidity and gradually opening it up, or you can treat local areas. I think it's something that is probably would be good to take advice on because you don't want to, cause mold growth or anything. But it can be really effective, I think, without needing to immerse the textile in any sort of reagent. You can use humidification very cautiously to help to open it up and to remove those sort of folds that are caused by long-term, by being in a space for a long time.
Спасибо.
Thank you. Well, getting back to the questions that have been asked in the course of your presentation, what do you do when you have any metallic accents or metallic elements embroidered or embedded into the textile when you cannot wash over it in order to avoid the further rusting or corrosion of the metals? The oxidation, can you remove this oxidation on the metal from the textile, and how to protect the textile itself while removing this oxidation from the surface of these embedded metallic elements?
Yeah, that is a very good question. Yes, it is a real problem when we have metal threads, for example, or metal elements which are oxidized. And in fact, we do very little. I think in the past, people have tried to remove the tarnish layer, but we have decided mostly now not to do that at all, but to leave it, because if you have a metal thread, for example, it might perhaps be silver with a gilding layer on top. And if you start using any chemical or physical method of cleaning, essentially all that you do is remove firstly the gold layer and then also layers of silver. And it's almost impossible to stop it tarnishing again. So each time you clean, you will remove more of the original material, but you won't achieve a permanently clean, untarnished surface. So I think we have decided mostly in the West that it's best to just leave it. And it is very sad because you don't regain the former appearance of the textile. But as I say, that there may be other ways of trying to show that to your museum audience. It avoids a lot of damage to the surrounding textile as well as to the metal itself.
Спасибо.
Thank you. And probably the last question from the same lady, Dana Danchenko. Well, in case when you need to tone some duplication material again, well, if it's like a new fabric, new textiles, but you need to give it a different color, what is the best way to achieve it, to give it a different tone if you need to?
I don't know if you're talking about support fabrics or replica fabrics, but we use chemical dyes for dyeing all of our fabrics that we use to support historic textiles and those to make replicas. And that is mainly because it is easier to create colors when you have a standard recipe, a formula, which you can adjust very slightly each time you want to make a different color. And also because they are more light fast, we know that having dyed the correct color, it's not going to fade as easily as a natural dye might. So we have more control of the color with a chemical dye. So we use those for both support and, yes, if we want to make a replica fabric as well. I hope that answers the question.
Просто пользователь прислал
Another user is now sent a clarification that the duplication material, basically this is what is the base or like a foundation of the material. So this is the question about the foundation material, foundation textile behind this exhibit, the textile.
Yes, I think the same thing applies really to any of the textiles that we use. Yes, we don't use natural dyes at all in our dyeing. We always use chemical dyes.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you very much, Frances. So far, we don't have any further questions. So, well, let me make an announcement about the webinar that we'll have following this webinar on the different dates. This month, we're going to have 2 more webinars. One of them, well, in the same format. This one is being organized jointly by the Common Secretariat. This one's going to be dedicated to the conservation of paper. And the speaker there will be Andrea Pataki-Khan. He's a professor from the University of Cologne in the area of conservation and the Cologne University of Applied Sciences. And then on 26th of May, there will be another webinar that is dedicated to the topics of the modern multimedia technologies that entertain the museum visitors. And Alexander Lavrov will be speaking about this. He has implemented more than 200 multimedia museum projects all over the world. He is the winner of different types of competitions and contests. On the 25th of May, there will be a webinar on the paper conservation on the 25th of May. And the next one on the multimedia, it's going to be only in Russian because the speaker is the Russian guy. One of the users previously asked whether there's going to be in translation into English of the workshops that we had previously. Unfortunately not. because they were handled by the Russian speakers for the Russian-speaking audiences, so there is no simultaneous interpretation there. With the webinars that are held in English by English speakers, the interpretation is provided. Let me also send a link via the chat facility to our website, where we published some of our news and messages and the possibilities to register for the upcoming workshops in Russian. It's already available in Russian, it's gonna appear in English, so that's where you can get registered for the upcoming events. In June, coming June, we'll also have several webinars, but we will feature the information about those slightly later. So as far as I understand, we have no further questions, Ms. Lennard. So our time of this webinar is almost over. So let me now give the floor to Carlos and Ms. Lennard, if you'd like to say some words as a conclusion to this, and this is gonna be winding up.
Thank you. I just want to say that, well, this is the first webinar that we organized together. And thanks to Frances, it has been amazing. I mean, a lot of information was shared. So I just really hope that our next webinars will have the same quality. And I would like to thank Frances for all your work. And we will meet again in the following webinars. But thank you very much, Maya.
Can I just say thank you very much indeed for inviting me, and thank you to everybody for coming to listen and for the questions. They're very good questions. And thank you to the interpreters. You must have done an amazing job. Thank you.
Спасибо. Да, мы
Thank you,
благодарим.
Frances. We thank our interpreters too, also our team of technical support. They've been keeping an eye on our communication facilities. And also, let me say this again, the recordings of this workshop are going to be published in both English and Russian at our YouTube channel. So the news will be featured, and the presentation, the lecture by Ms. Lennard is being translated into Russian, and all of the registered users, we will send it to you via email. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time at our next event on May 25th. Goodbye, and congratulations on upcoming Museum Day.